Hello, so I'll explain the Russian faction and my deck, but the same principles can be applied to the American faction as well, because when you make an army in this game, you have two armies of a faction, and you combine those two armies to obtain a deck that is either very good at something, or just average at everything, or sometimes it can be over specialized or super specialized as well. So again, two important things: there's no perfect deck, and two, you'll either be supporting your team or your team will be supporting you. If you don't understand these two principles, then most of the times you'll just have a bad game. Also, the easiest way to kind of learn the game is to go into the armory over here from Arsenal. And for example, look at all of the individual armies of a faction. So the VDV brigade, and then look at, let's say, at Reconnaissance, and then switch to the tank and see what they have as Reconnaissance, and then to the other ones. This is much easier to understand. Also, let's look at the vehicles. So for example, the VDV will have light vehicles that have a lot of firepower. The tank brigade, well, has the best armor in the faction. It will be like the Armatas, the Barbaries, the T-90s and some other stuff. The motorized infantry, which is more or less a support army, more or less, again, it has some very cool stuff. As you can see, it doesn't have anything in the vehicles almost. The coastal troops, as you can see, they're a little harder to explain. Just think of them as special forces with a regular army, if that makes sense. And over here, the mechanized infantry has basically the working army. It's the working army with the T-72s, the Storms, and the PM, anyway, and also the Meteorite. So all of these things will have very special units. So when you're making a deck, you either go for the very specialized unit, in this case, let's say it's the UR-77 Meteorite or other stuff, or you try to... So again, let's say like this, there are three ways to make a deck: either make it balanced, either make it very specialized, or just make it, how should I put it, super specialized, if that makes sense. For example, you can have a deck that only has a lot of good armor and you'll just be spamming armor all game, no artillery, maybe some air support, but not much else. And again, the same principles apply to the American faction armies, but the Americans are even a little more weird because some of their toys are very expensive and some of them, they don't really have a lot of firepower there, but they make up in other stuff. So again, it's a little harder to explain. I'll have to make a video for the American faction, but probably not, because you'll never be able to play two factions very good in this game, because first of all, you need to master one faction and then master the other one and then kind of understand what everything does. So again, I'll just show you the deck I'm using very often right now, and you'll understand why it's like this. Also, a few extra tips on making an army. You can actually exceed the amount of points in a slot. For example, I can have, let's say, it's 10%. It's actually in the game's tips. You can exceed the maximum supply of a branch by 10% as long as you don't exceed the total 10,000 points. So basically you can have, let's say, 100 more points in helicopters as long as you have 100 less points into something else. So it's a very important thing, because sometimes you'll be missing, let's say, 5 or 10 points in a branch and you cannot make your perfect army if you don't remove some points. No, you actually have a lot of leeway to do what you want. So when you're making an army, just notice that, for example, if you choose air, 500 vehicles, and coastal, you'll actually be kind of weak in the vehicle department. So only 1,500 points plus 10%, which is 150 more. So you have to kind of be careful of that, because you might end up with something that has no helicopters and barely any air. 500 for air is very tiny, considering aircraft, I mean, jets generally need a lot more points than vehicles or something like that. Also, if you play like this, you might end up with a lot less reconnaissance, a lot less helicopters, aircraft. You might be thinking, well, this is kind of a cool deck, but it has limitations. Yeah, you'll be hard countered by a lot of stuff if you play like this. Support is also pretty good, vehicles is pretty good, but so let's say you choose the VDV and the coastal, you're suffering the vehicles, the support department, but it's kind of like a nice and well balanced deck, right? Not exactly, because like I said, this is kind of over specializing. You need a working army plus a specialized army branch to kind of make a balanced deck in the beginning. So I recommend you make balanced decks in the beginning. This is a bit of an exaggeration what I have over here, but let's go over all of the choices and you'll understand why I chose them, and some of them are actually very specific and very interesting. So let's go over here, defense and helis, which is the deck I'm using right now. So what do we have for Reconnaissance? For Reconnaissance, have the VDV Sniper. They're actually pretty good, but more importantly, you have the long-range rifles, which give you access to the T-Orsis 5000. I know this from Tarkov, which is one of the best sniper rifles in the world. I think this is the one. It's hard to tell. No, I think this is the SVD, and I think this is it. Interesting. Anyway, as you can see, this has a range of 1000 meters, which is crazy range for an infantry unit. So basically, if you put them in a building or somewhere on the road or something like that, they'll have 30 shots of the rifle, which means you'll be killing a lot of infantry units. And this is great to counter infantry units with manpads like anti-air or anti-vehicle manpads, or just advancing armies, or just light scouting cars, or even at some point some of the armor vehicles. Now, an armor vehicle usually has about 15 to 20 to 30 millimeter armor, so that means this rifle can penetrate most vehicles and some of the bigger stuff as well. So as you can see, this is 30 armor. It's kind of like the recurring theme. Unless you up armor some of the stuff, most of the vehicles in the game will be destroyed by it. Also, it's very important to note that the helicopters don't really have a lot of armor either, so you will be able to kind of shoot at helicopters as well. And more importantly, you can use the snipers to kind of sneak around and basically destroy the support stuff like the anti-air, the trucks, and the artillery, of course, as well. Because, well, it depends on the artillery, but most of the times you can pierce the armor. So this is a very specialized unit, and I'm kind of showing you the specialized decks before anything, so you kind of get the idea. Again, this is an exaggeration of a deck, and I don't recommend that you use it in the beginning, but just to understand what are the benefits of some troops. The VDV Spetsnaz, also, I should have explained this. So stealth is very, very important, because if something has a detection range of, let's say, 1000, if you put them in the woods and if you disable their fire, which means they'll only fire if they're far upon, which means they'll only attack if attacked, they'll be almost impossible to detect. So you can actually do some cloak and dagger stuff with these troops, but it's kind of hard to do, mostly because enemies will have a lot of jets and helicopters. But you can do it, you can try, definitely try some of the sneaky stuff. Why did I choose these guys, the VDV Spetsnaz? Well, mostly because they have two sniper rifles, the SVDK, which is great for long range anti-infantry, and also because they have the RPG-16, which has 300mm armor penetration, plus 700 range, plus they have 6 of them, so it's kind of like a well-rounded unit against infantry and vehicles. Also, don't be afraid to use the drones, because the drones will give you a lot of visibility, plus the coordinates. And basically, you will have a drone on your side of the map, you can use them to scout or to even defend, because when this drone passes by, it will shoot with 80 gems, 280 gems. So it's very cheap, shoots 280 gems and can actually get a few kills. Plus, scouting is very important in the later parts of the game, where enemies will kind of set up a defense grid and you will not actually be kind of afraid to use jets, or if you don't have jets, you might as well just have a few drones here and there. The Oran is just a much better drone that flies, well, I guess this is not really explained with altitude, high altitude and low altitude, but you can see the drones also have laser designation, so you can use, let's say, a Krasnopol round with artillery and designate the laser, let's say, to an enemy tank or building, or can we designate a building? I never tried it too much, but know that they have lasers. So Recon also has the laser abilities, most of them at least. As you can see, I gave this one 2 coordinate 80 gems. The sensors are not really needed because it also has a lot of vision already. And more importantly, you don't always have to upgrade everything to the maximum, you just want some cheap stuff, because their main role is to scout. Also, I have 5-star mat with the Metis 2, which is actually a decent 80 gem. It doesn't have a lot of range, but it has a lot of penetration power. So this means you can use, let's say, a few Sarmat to Metises to scout the roads or kind of attempt to flank a unit. So for example, if the enemy is too static in their defenses, or you might as well just try and hit their supply lines, and I don't know. It can be used for a lot of things, plus it's very, very cheap, so that means you can either scout or do some other stuff with them. Now, any unit that you put, any infantry unit will also need a transport. This is modern warfare and combined arms. You don't have infantry just running around the field, because it'll be super slow, first of all, and it will be harder to get into position, and sometimes you need to put the infantry in the building, and then you need to park the vehicle behind the building. So if they cannot defeat the approaching enemy, you will retreat the infantry to the vehicle and then run away into the woods. Or if you think you can defeat them, you can actually turn the building. You can make the vehicle turn around the building and shoot at enemy as well. Now this is only 45 points, but it has a Cornet M. Again, these are special forces, so they're not available to anyone. Which is great because it can penetrate most armor, has 2 of them, plus the KT. Which it has 2 of them. Let me see where they are. You can also just look at the vehicles themselves to see where the guns are. He's over there. Where is the second one? I don't know. I'll look at that some other time. Plus it has a 30-meter autocannon, which does a lot of damage, has a lot of range, and I recommend you put everything outside of the range of the enemy. So don't right-click on enemies unless you know what they're doing. Most of the times you need to click around the enemy, so the vehicles will shoot at the enemy themselves. Just right-clicking will be very, very bad most of the times. Plus it has decent armor as well. Also, why did I choose the VDV? By the way, when you make a deck, anyone can use the vehicles in the deck if they are, let's say, an infantry that wants to be transported in this. So basically I can put any other unit in these 2 vehicles if they fit. This has a crew size of 5. This has space for 5 soldiers. This has space for 5 soldiers. But they're also super fast. Remember to press F while giving an order for a vehicle to reach a location, because that means they'll follow the road, which means they'll travel super fast. Off-road is 4 times slower. 3 times slower in this case. So when you're traveling to points, you probably want to press F unless you want to ambush. Or if you're running away, definitely don't press F. But I guess it depends on the case. Basically, I can put the snipers in the VDV Typhoon, which has 100. Again, you might think, well, that's not so good, is it? It's actually very good because it's cheap. It has a 30mm autocannon, a machine gun. It can carry 5 troops. It has 12 health, which is decent compared to some of the other stuff. Armor again is decent, it can be barrage out, but it also has smoke, which is super important. And taking all of this into consideration, basically in the beginning of the game you can put a few specialist units in these machines and just go to the front line. And this is very, very good to transport Cornet, Iglas, and other specialist units. So you can basically transport the Cornet, an Igla, and the Sniper Squad, or even the Spetsnaz in one of these things, and then you'll just have a huge advantage over the enemy. Also, you can just make, you know, a little bit of an ambush. So kind of get the idea. You can also just call the vehicles on their own, so you can call, let's say, these 5 vehicles on their own, and that's actually a pretty good fighting force. Plus, it'll have a lot of mobility. Now let's go to the infantry. Infantry for the Russians are basically anti-air with the Iglas or Verbas. Sadly, I don't have the Verba on this deck. I wish I had, but I don't. But this is also pretty good. Iglas are also in a few versions as well. Pretty good guns. By the way, this is the grenade launcher. That's why you see the gun and then you see the grenade launcher, 40mm. Actually, is it 40? Yeah, I don't know. I guess it depends on how you look at things. But it's pretty good, the grenade launcher. Plus, they have a medium machine gun. So anti-air, VDV Cornet. It's actually pretty important to notice the difference in squad. So if you have a normal Cornet squad, they only have 1 Cornet. But the VDV has 2 of them, which means, again, this is super important, so pay attention. I'm joking, but this is very important. So this squad has 2 Cornet launchers, which means 2 Cornet launchers will launch at the same time, which means 2 ATGM's missiles will fly at the enemy. If the enemy is a tank with APS or APC with APS, that means one of them will trigger the APS and then it has a 5-second cooldown, so the second ATGM will definitely hit the target. So that means this crew can bypass APS on tanks and vehicles. So it's very, very important to notice the small little differences. Also, it has very good armor penetration, very good distance. It will get destroyed by APS, but since we are firing 2 at the same time, some of them will definitely hit. Plus, the AKs are pretty good as well. Again, the guns are not so important. If you know Tarkov, you'll understand what beats what. So they actually are 5 members, which is more than the usual Cornet squad, and they have pretty decent weapons and stats. Why the BTR robot? Because this also has a Cornet. So if you deliver the squad on the front line, 150 points, you will have free Hornet launchers at the same time, which means 3 ATGM will be launched at the enemy at the same time, which means you'll be able to destroy most stuff even if it has APS. If it uses smoke, then no. But also has two machine guns, which can help you deal with infantry as well. Now this unit over here is mostly for a generalist purpose. They have the underbarrel gun launchers, but they also have 2 medium machine guns, 8 armor, 50 health and 10 people. So this is your anti-infantry squad. They can survive a lot of firepower. They are para-droppable. They also have the smoke, which is very important. Not a lot of infantry have the smoke. Plus they have the RPG 7V, which has a lot of shots and pretty good penetration. So this is more like an anti-infantry when you don't know what to put over there. Also like to use the BTRD. 45 is very cheap because it has the core machine gun. Does a lot of damage, can penetrate most vehicles, can attack also helicopters very well. Plus the AGS, which is great against infantry as well. But sadly the grenade launchers are a bit weak right now. But this is mainly anti-infantry. So the squad is anti-infantry, the vehicle is anti-infantry. These guys over here are a bit expensive for what they do because they're not very specialized. But they have 2 medium machine guns as well. You can look at the stats if you like. But they also have 4 RPG-28, which is very good because it has 900mm penetration. If you look at this, this one has 500. You can also shoot helicopters, so keep that in mind. This can also shoot helicopters 400 meters. Sometimes you might want a bigger distance, lower punch launcher in some cases. But there is a catch. They only have 4 shots, so that's not a lot of shots. But there is another catch. I gave them the Kurgonets. The Kurgonets is great because it has a big gun, which is the 57mm auto cannon, which can also target helicopters up to 1000 meters. So this thing will definitely kill helicopters very easily. It also has the PK-80 machine gun. Again, machine guns are pretty important as well to destroy infantry in buildings and some other stuff. It has 4 cornets M, which is modernized. M stands for modernized. M usually means it's more recent. So not all of the cornets will be the same. This is a lot better than some of the other stuff. Plus it has the bullet launchers. And it's a little harder to explain what the bullet is. Just imagine it's a fast firing ATGM, which can also target a lot of cool stuff. Plus it does a lot of damage. It also has good penetration. So sometimes you'll want to disable weapons, but I don't recommend you start to micromanage based on the target. Just leave it as it is. Also has 4 APS. That means this is kind of like the cheapest unit that can have 4 APS. So this thing is kind of invulnerable to ATGMs for a little bit. You can also cross water, sadly not really used, plus the smoke grenade. Okay, this thing is a beast. I mostly take these guys because I'm the vehicles, so I can use the vehicles with other infantry or just on their own if I want. And this is a very specialized squad. I don't really use them that often, plus they don't really have a lot of ammo. And then I have these guys over here just because I needed something to fill up the slots, and they're okay-ish. Again, same principle. These guys have 12 shots for 400 meters, but this is the same thing. They can target helicopters. This is very good for helicopters and some other stuff, but not good for heavier vehicles. So, kind of get the idea. 6 shots, 4 shots, 12 shots. So this is kind of like a more generalist infantry. Also, they are pretty good at taking damage. Look at these guys. Machines. No, okay, that's for infantry. Now let's go to vehicles. Of course the Terminator BMP, because I love this thing, it's so cool. Probably one of the coolest vehicles in the you-know-what conflict. Twin autocannons, which does a lot of damage to infantry. This thing will shred infantry plus the machine gun plus the attacker launchers. Now these are a little weaker. Again, it's the attack at so it's still pretty good. They're a little weaker, but they still do the damage. Look at the damage over here. I guess you can... I should have shown you that as well. So this 12 damage for the cornet. The Kurgonets has 13 damage with the cornet M. So you kind of see that damage is not uniform. So some of them will do more damage. That means you can two-shot some stuff and you can also get a little bit luckier. So I guess that's why the Kurgonets is so good, because this can do a little bit of damage to vehicles. But you also have this thing, so if you penetrate the armor with the cornet and then you hit it with the bullet, it might destroy it depending on what it is, because it has 9 damage plus 13, that's 22. Again, small details, but they're important. I also like to keep it as a default because it's so good when it's so cheap and so nice. It also has 2 smokes but no APS, but this has a tank armor. So this is probably one of the cheapest tanks without being a tank, but with enough firepower to do a lot of damage. Now, this will only add side armor, so it's very important to see what armor it adds and also in what situation you're using it. If it doesn't have side armor, don't rush it into urban conflicts. The grenade launchers are also pretty cool for handling infantry, so if you want, you can just make this an anti-infantry weapon. Plus, it can destroy a very weak target super fast. I guess I can use it at some point, I'll have to think about it, but I just like to make them cheaper so I can use them more often. The cornet D1, which is just something to carry a cornet. As you can see, we have 8 cornets. By the way, these missiles are for infantry as well, so they will do some damage to infantry as well, so don't worry that you cannot hit infantry with these weapons. Also like to keep it with the optics, so cornet M without the optics will be shorter range. So this is 1200mm penetration, 13 damage, 1800 meters active. Yeah, it can really pack a punch. Now the chrysanthemum is also a beautiful machine. I recommend you always use it as the chrysanthemum. This is actually pretty unique in the game because it fires 2 missiles per target. So that means it will fire 180 GM after the other, which means it will fire 2 at the same time, which means it will trigger APS and then it will penetrate the armor. But if it doesn't have APS, it will just destroy it instantly. Also, it has very good range, very good penetration. So this thing is a tank killer and it's very cheap, plus it has APC armor, 100 armor, which is great. Plus it can cross water and can do a lot of useful things. Also look at over here at the auto loading and moving and shooting. You can actually see some of the limitations. So this can fire on the go, this has to be stationary to fire. I like this stuff as well. And then you just have the Armata. The Armata is one of the best tanks in the game. A lot of armor everywhere, 2 smokes and 4 APS, or more importantly, the guns. And the Russian tanks usually will have a top... well, let's just say that they have a missile. So you have missiles in the tanks as well. So first of all, they'll fire their missiles, and in this case, it's top armor damage. Top armor damage is basically, most of the times, a one-shot kill. Most of the times, not all the time. So, I guess... I don't know how to put this. I guess you can micromanage, because sometimes if the tank has APS, you'll want to shoot normal round, because they'll not get stopped by the APS. While this will get destroyed by the APS, but then the normal rounds don't get destroyed by it. That means you can just have a lot of older tanks shooting at modern tanks and it will not trigger the APS. 4 APS to smoke, a lot of armor, a lot of damage, tracking missile, top damage tracking missile, which is great. For the PKT, this thing will shred anything that is in front of it. Very cool, but again, kind of expensive and a little harder to use. And over here I just have 4 T90s. Why do I have the T90s? Well, the T90s have the Stora system. I guess they cannot say the Stora system over here. Which means they have a 30% chance of dodging missiles. Which is not a lot, but with the tank armor, with the dodge chance, and also the ATGM, I'll call it an ATGM as well, even though it's not really that... Oh. Has a funny face. So, missiles, Dora system, smoke, Ford and PKT machine guns. As you can see, no APS and the armor is not as good as it could be, plus the speed is pretty low, the Armata is super fast, it zooms on the battlefield almost. Plus the vision range, vision is very important, that's why the Armata is actually so hard to kill sometimes, because it has very good optics and you can see almost as good as a recon vehicle. So this is not a main battle tank in my opinion. I would actually give it another category. So if you want to think of it like this is a command and control vehicle that can also deal a ton of damage. So, by the way, this is the APS system. So if you're thinking of using this as a main battle tank, no, don't use it. It's much better if you keep it in reserve, or it leads a charge of T90s, or it just sits in the bushes or the wood somewhere defending your stuff or does some other stuff. Because of the vision, I'll not get into it, but you get the idea. It is a lot more useful than it seems. Plus it has a lot of shells, it does a lot of stuff very, very nicely. I already explained this. And the Sprut. Now the Sprut is an interesting vehicle. It has APC armor if you want to up armor it. And it's a shooter type of tank. So this is kind of like your cheap tanks that can shoot very expensive tanks or APCs and destroy them very, very fast because it has the same caliber as the tank. Obviously it will not penetrate armor as well as a tank because they have different ammo. This can penetrate up to 800. This is 520 max and this is 600. Again, it depends on a lot of other things as well. Missiles. So, as you can see, again, I'm not going to details, but this is basically an APC with a tank gun, but a little bit of a weaker punch. So, if you stack 4 of these or 3 of these, you can kill almost anything, but they're very weak as well. Supply. Supply is also very important because not only do you need the trucks to supply stuff to other squads, but you can just use them for transporting people. So, for example, I can get a squad of Cornet, Igla, and VDV Sniper. Just put them in a truck. Well, I guess not in a truck because it only has 14 seats instead of 15. But sometimes in the beginning of the game or the late game, if you want something delivered quickly to the front line, just put it in a truck. You cannot use supplies and soldiers at the same time. And just make it move there. 100 speed is actually super good as you saw. So if you're losing a side, let's say, you might want to move maybe some Spetsnaz and maybe some Iglas to a front line very, very fast. Also, you can just use it to transport 2000 supplies to a unit that needs it. For example, I use the trucks to supply the VDV Iglas and the VDV Cornets when in buildings, so I can make little supply points. So they're actually very, very useful for transporting troops, for transporting supplies to units that are stranded, for transporting stuff to repair a tank. So if you have a tank that is unable to move, just use this truck to transport supplies to them. It's so useful to have trucks, and this is just the bigger loader, 10,000 supplies. Sadly, you'll need most of the times 2 supply trucks, otherwise you'll be in deep, deep trouble because you cannot support your assaults or your defenses. This is a pretty good missile. Yeah, I don't know what to say about this. I guess the developers could make it so that... Well, I guess you do have an advantage. Also, let's speak about the radar. Radar is very important. When you turn on the radar, you get twice the high altitude range. Which means your range will be 9,000 if you go with the low missiles, but I recommend you always go for 4 missiles, otherwise it will be very easy to destroy. 8,000 high altitude and then just 5,000 low altitude. It cannot target choppers, very, very important, and a lot of people complain about this. It cannot target choppers. But it can target the cruise missiles and the jets. So keep in mind all of these considerations. And the Tor is also one of the best anti-air unit in the game, just because it has a lot of range without the radar, and with the radar turn on, it's the same bonus. High altitude stuff gets killed from 3,400. The low altitude stuff is about 3,000 as well, but the more important thing is that this is your main helicopter killer against the Americans. Americans really love to spam those stupid helicopters. I also prefer this version over here with the 16 missiles because you don't need to supply it, so you can just make it sit there and it will intercept anything that flies. Well, except MLRS, but that's another story. And also I have the artillery over here, the Coalitia. Why is the Coalitia so good? You have to look at 2 stats for the long-range artillery. Aim time, which is more or less the same for everyone, but the reload time is super short on the Coalitia, plus it's automated. So that means it will fire very fast, and I recommend you choose the cluster. You also have the extended range, which will make it fire from bigger distance, but also give it access to the Krasnov pole, and you already know how to use a laser, so I'm not going to that again. But it's super useful to fire a Krasnov pole round as well. I just like to have it to the cluster rounds because the cluster rounds basically spread their damage on a big surface. They don't do as much damage as in the center, so the difference between high explosive and cluster is this one. High explosive does a lot of damage in the center, but then damage gradually decreases to the edge. Cluster does a lot of damage to everything in its area, but it's kind of weak against building and some other stuff, but it can also destroy helicopters or low-flying helicopters and some other stuff. Plus, it's great to destroy supply caches, it's great to destroy infantry in woods, it's great for a lot of things. I guess it's a personal preference, but I just like how cluster rounds work in the game. Plus, this artillery fires it very fast. I recommend use artillery in pairs of 2. So basically in 10 seconds we'll fire 4 152mm cluster shells, and that will be enough to kill most things anyway. Now for helicopters, you want to look at a few main capabilities. You want to look at ACM over here, electronic countermeasures, for 25%. The Alligator is amazing. It's one of the best choppers of the Russian army, and it's pretty cheap as well in the game for a lot of reasons. It has a 30mm autocannon. I prefer to have the gun pods as well. I guess I should replace that with something else. I just want it to be a little cheaper since the gun pods are not used that much, but the personal preference. I guess I should replace it since it will be a little better. I'll actually change this right now, but I like usually the gun pods. It has 12 attack launchers because it has 3 on each gun pod, or I guess gun attachment. So that means 12 attacker, but it's not the upgraded version, so they're not that good. Plus it has Eagle Eyes. Eagle Eyes is 2000 meters at low altitude. They can also just fire their missiles at jets, so don't try to intercept these things with jets, because sometimes they'll just catch them. This is kind of like the basic loadout. It's very good, it's pretty fast. It also has 30 armor, which is not really seen in that many helicopters. Probably one of the only ones that is so good. Plus it has a lot of detection range. It has a lot of cool stuff. So all around good helicopter, and the Russian army really lacks helicopters. Now this thing is multi-purpose. It has a cannon, pretty good. It has the gun pods, it has the missiles, it has the Coton, which is pretty good as well to destroy some smaller stuff. So it has 80 GM, it can carry 8 people, and it's good for squatting and some other stuff as well. So it also has 10% electronic countermeasures plus 10 flares. So it's very good to use them like this. You can also just put one of the Mi-24s in front of the K-52 alligators, and this will get shot first. It will use up the flares, it will use up the enemy's ammo, plus one missile might miss, or so on. And that's very good. Now about the other helicopters, it also depends. I also recommend you, again, it depends on how many points you have. Why would you want to use this one? Well, first of all, it can land a lot of troops, it can land a lot of supplies. For example, you put 24,000 supplies in a portion of the map that is very well defended, and then just send the trucks, collect the supply from the pile, like these ones. For example, 4 of the trucks or just 3 of these things, and they'll just drive the supplies all over the map, which is 10 times easier to do the supply and the logistics, but really have no points for this. So that's how some people do it. They take a lot of supplies, they put it in a point of the map, and then they just use the trucks to go back and forth and supply everything, because it's much faster than supplying a spot and then making the truck go back to the base and then summoning another truck to do the same. Also, if you're wondering why is the Mikhailevich M28 so good, well, mostly because of this over here. You can have the Igla S, which is pretty good as well. So it can be anti-air helicopter. Viker is supposed to just be a faster ATGM, even though it's not really well shown over here. And then you have the Lemur missiles, which are top armor damage weapons. Top armor damage. Their max speed is not that good, but this is 100mm top armor damage, so it will most likely one-shot a lot of stuff because it has 20 damage. I think the Abrams, or maybe I'm mistaken, maybe the best Abrams tank can survive one hit and it will be left with 1 HP, but other than that, it will one-shot everything. Very big range, very big detection range, and very good to use, but it's also super expensive in this loadout. Look at this, 250, and it can only shoot tanks. Kind of a mess. Also just give it more Lemur missiles, which will make it a super effective vehicle hunter, but I don't recommend you do it like that. I never recommend you use too many points like that. I kind of recommend you to use it with the Viker and the Eagle Eyes, kind of like as a backup alligator, but it doesn't have the same durability, because it only has 15% instead of 25%, so yeah, that's some of the differences if you want to think of them like that. Let me explain some of this stuff as well. So this will kind of be more or less the same. You can just give it a few attackers, a few Eagles, then let's say a few rockets. So this will basically be turning into a K-52 alligator, but it will not have the same armor, but more or less the same stuff. So yeah, again, you can just play with some of the loadouts. You will probably not use all of your missiles anyway. This guy over here. This can carry cargo, people, and has a lot of guns, which is kind of an interesting little thingy. So the Mi-8 is a wonderful helicopter, and I wish I would have enough room to use it, because it's so good. It does everything you want it to do. It has Igla S anti-air 4, it has 4 ATGM, also has the rocket pods, no other guns, but it can haul supplies and people, and has pretty good speed and some other stuff, plus 15% electronic countermeasures. So this is actually one of the best Russian helicopters because it's so multi-purpose, it can do anything. Just imagine this thing carrying 2 squads to a location, and then going back and getting some supplies from a pile, and then it just goes and defends them very, very well. Actually, I would have more time to explain all of these particularities, but sadly I don't. This one is more or less the same thing, but it's not as useful. But it has a little more capacity for supplies. Less speed, 10 ACM instead of 15. I guess it depends on how you want to use it. You might want to use it as nothing at all over here, but gun pods or some other stuff, it can be really good as well. As for the helicopters, now there. Well, the air would take me 1 hour to explain if I would do it properly, but just know you usually need 3 types of jets. One, anti-air, and you also need a few more missiles over here. You want a long-range missile, 7,000 meters. And then you want kind of like a short-range missile, and I like to use the R-27R for this. I would also recommend you use, let's say, the medium range, but again, that will just increase the cost. So that's why I prefer to use it like this, because usually when you shoot at a plane, you shoot it to the long range and then it will deploy flares, and then you might shoot this again. But usually you don't want this to be a solo fighter. If you want a solo fighter, you might want a lower range missile. Also, these things will not target helicopters. So the other missiles will target helicopters as well, but you can also just use the auto cannon for the helicopters. Again, there are a lot of things to be said over here, but I just like to make it this one resistant to missiles, so it can usually down a jet, and it's pretty cheap. So anti-fighter. This is anti-radiation, which is kind of like how most people use it. So it will target anything with a radar. That means if the enemies are using, let's say, a cheap radar unit, 150 points, this is wasted if you do it for that. But if you can destroy a Patriot battery or one of the S-300s, with this one is going to be great. Has 20% electronic counterfire, so that means it will kind of destroy its target anyway. And it also has a few missiles to shoot at enemy planes in case they get too close. It can also it has the short range missiles that can shoot helicopters as well. So 4 missiles, 4 anti-radiation missiles, which means this will most likely destroy something anti-air, but it will cost 400 points. I'm trying to shave the points off so you can make these more specialized, but I don't see the point. Also, as you can see, these have electronic counterfire measures. And then the big bomb. Now, if you're thinking about using the nuclear option is really not worth it most of the time. Just use 2FAB 9000. And this is usually strong enough to take a lot of punches. Also, as you can see, 20 HP, 30. This is also great to get a lot of vision. Now you can also use some other configurations. For example, you can use some of the other jets to drop bombs, because that's what they're made of. Or right? Right. You can also just swap this, let's say, and have a few clusters over here. But as you can see, they're already getting pretty expensive. So again, it's very hard to use the jets and it will take too much to explain everything. So this is kind of like my basic Russian deck. This is all of the things you need to know for the American deck as well. And if you use the same principles to build one of the decks, you'll probably have a lot of success. But like I said, I don't recommend you start off with this deck unless you are really experienced in this game. Otherwise, you might want to start with some of the basic stuff. So this is the specialist army, but you probably want to start with the working man's army, which would be something like this. It's much better balanced, but the basic decks are trash, so I recommend you make your own. Something like this. I didn't finish this, but you kind of get the idea. You also just have artillery and light defenses. As you can see, I don't have heavy vehicles. I kind of recommend you play this as a newer player, because you have access to a lot of the stuff, plus you have access to the strelets and some of the cooler stuff, plus more artillery, slower but bigger supply chains. Same principle over here. This is a gun that will shoot at tanks without triggering their APS or at APCs. Again, some of this thing is very specialized. But this Spetsnaz over here is also pretty good. You can also just have anti-material rifles, as you can see, 1200 meters. Again, there are a lot of things to be discussed, but I basically explain everything about all of this stuff with my group. Usually you would want to have an infantry unit and a cavalry unit, and that's kind of like the basic. So for the beginning, I would recommend you do something like this: working man's army, motorized infantry and guard tank brigade. The same thing for the American as well. Just something with good tanks and something with good infantry, and the rest will come along the way. Just slowly start to practice with helicopters and jets, because they're some of the most expensive units in the game, but they're also very easy to lose. Anyway, if you have questions, just ask. Also, I probably should have mentioned this, but let me show you. The Russian nuclear is a missile. It can be shot down by anti-air. The American nuclear option is a bomb, which cannot be shot by anything. So as long as the plane makes it, it will drop the bomb. Also, if you want to learn a little bit better about different paper, rock, scissor tactics, just recommend you look at some of the combinations of infantry. So infantry and vehicles. So you'll never use a T-Armata alone, like I said. So you might as well just use, let's say, a Cornet squad with a BTR with a robot. The transport is called a robot, BTRD robot. And you might want to engage the enemy with the BTRD and then immediately disembark, so all of them shoot at the same time, right? And then to support them, you probably want a helicopter in the back. And then you also have want to have some artillery close behind. And then you also have to have the Tor, but the Tor has to be protected by some form of infantry at some point. And then you just designate your targets with the drones, or sometimes even with the vehicles if you can. Sometimes you'll send infantry to hide nearby the enemy roads. So it's a continuous task, so don't just over-specialize and just play one type of thing, because that will usually mean you'll end up losing. Just try to expand and make a supply chain, and kind of make ambushes, defense points, and kind of like tripwires for the enemy. For example, I sometimes will put a Sprott D in the middle of a road, so the enemy uses artillery against it. Using artillery, rocket artillery especially, means they'll actually have to waste a lot of supply points, which means most of the times they spend a lot of supply points and they only kill a small tank like this, and then they have to wait for a few more minutes. So it's actually a very valid tactic to give false target to your opponent, so they use their heavy artillery to just destroy something that is not worth it. And then you'll have, let's say, 3 or 4 minutes of peace, or maybe sometimes 5 minutes before they can shoot again. So take all of this into consideration when playing the game. Bye bye.